My guest tonight is a journalist and author whose new book is called The Desert and the Sea, 977 Days Captive on the Somali Pirate Coast. Please welcome Michael Scott Moore. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to see you.
This is one of those stories that halfway through the book you have to stop and keep reminding yourself that it is real.
It's real.
It reads like a novel. Every story has so much detail. But let's start at the beginning. The question that my grandmother would ask if she were interviewing you, and that is, what were you doing in Somalia?
Why did I go? Yeah, right. I was writing a book about pirates. I was writing a very different book about pirates. I went because I had covered a trial of 10 Somali pirates in Hamburg. I was working in Germany at the time, in Berlin. And it turned out half of them were from this one town in central Somalia. And I was already interested in the history of piracy because piracy had sort of exploded off the Somali coast. And I had a fabulous idea for a book.
And so you went there. And you tell the story in the beginning of the book about how, you know, these people surround your car. There's a group of guys, and you think to yourself, oh, they're probably just going to check my passport.
Right.
You don't think that in this moment you were being kidnapped.
My mind actually recoiled from the idea I was getting kidnapped.
Right, and when that sinks into your brain, when that moment clicks, what is your greatest fear?
Well, the first thing I thought about was my family. I mean, I knew that I was, from that moment on, it was going to be miserable for my mother and for the rest of my family and friends.
Right, and you were kidnapped by these pirates, and what I love about this book, if I was recommending it to anyone, is I'd say it's not about the results. Like, spoiler alert, you're here.
I made it out.
Right? Yeah, it's not about that. It really is about the journey, the 977 days, because you talk about the pirates, and honestly, what I found commendable is that you humanize them.
Thank you.
Why would you do that? They kidnapped you.
That's what I wanted to do with the book. I spent a lot of time with them. It was not 24 hours of hatred all the time, and it's impossible to live like that, as a matter of fact. And one thing I noticed when I got out, I saw a movie by Abdurrahman Sissako called Timbuktu, that made the Islamists who were coming into Timbuktu ridiculous but human, and that was my experience with the pirates.
You also talk about in the book how the Somali pirate problem started as a reaction to colonialism. You talk about how countries like China, you know, robbed the fishermen of their livelihood. You talk about how these countries were thrust into poverty, and it's an interesting idea, but it's not an excuse to pillage and plunder. Like, when you are sitting in captivity, are you thinking to yourself, well, I also understand how they got here? You're not thinking it at that time.
No, because the roots of Somali piracy are definitely in illegal fishing, but by the time they were capturing big cargo ships, and especially by the time they were capturing me, it was no longer about illegal fishing.
Right.
It was simply about greed. It was about getting a lot of money.
And it had become a business. We've seen it now, and
organized crime.
Right. It's now gotten to a place where people just accept that. They go, Somali pirates, Somali pirates, Somali pirates. Right. What I really loved about the book, though, is you have a few moments where there's humor in what many people would think is a completely humorless situation, where you're laughing with your captors. Like, at one point you talk about exercising, and I really loved it because you decided to teach the Somali pirates yoga.
Well, yes. Okay, it didn't happen quite that directly. I knew I was going to need to exercise because I had moved into a prison house that looked like it was going to be my home for a while.
Right.
And so I asked them for a mat because I didn't think I was going to be able to jog around the room without them shooting at me. So I decided to get a mat and start to do yoga.
Right.
I had this idea that I would do it while they weren't looking, but there was no moment where they weren't looking. So I started to do yoga, and they thought it was funny. And they came in and imitated me, and slowly, a few of them weren't joking, I realized, and I started to correct their postures. So I might actually be the only Westerner who's taught yoga to Somali pirates.
You see, like moments like that, it really, I mean, illuminate, you know, how amazing your journey was in this experience. Because you go through moments of joy, just fragments of joy. And then, I mean, there's a lot of pain throughout the story. One of the most powerful quotes you have in the book, and I'll paraphrase it, is basically where you talk about hope. and how dangerous hope can be. Why do you say that?
Because it was, I think the line is, hope was like heroin for a hostage, and it could be just as destructive. And that was because you start to feel hope. The pirates actually cultivated that. They said, Michael, you're going to go out in 2 weeks. You're going to go out in 1 month, you know, and you would believe it at first. And then you'd be hopeful, and then afterwards it would be despair. And each time through the cycle would be worse than the time before. So you went through this, the cycle itself became destructive, and you had to sort of detach yourself from that, from the hope as well as the despair.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is the best way for you to cope with this was to let go of hope.
That's right. That's right. At some point, I knew that there was at least a 50% chance I wasn't going to make it out alive. So I had to let go of that notion that I might die or I might live. The whole idea of a future had to sort of go away.
Right, and there are moments where you talk about your wish to be free. I mean, you know, there's a part in the book where you talk about seeing an unattended gun.
Yeah.
And that's one of those moments where, when I'm reading it, I've played way too many PlayStation games. So I'm like, oh yeah, you grab the gun and you shoot your way out.
That's how you do it, yeah, exactly.
But when you're in that situation, you see the gun, you think about grabbing the gun. Like, how many times, does that also mess with you in a way?
I did that several times. First of all, there were always guns lying around. But on a few occasions, there was just the gun, and the pirate had left the room. And I went through all the motions in my head, and I thought very carefully about doing that. And I would have if I'd been trained to do it.
Right.
And even then, it might have been suicidal. In any case, there were always too many guards for me to have done it.
Right.
You know, in any way that wasn't suicidal. So I had to think about that often and wrestle with it, and eventually I wound up, you know, settling myself.
You also have a story of how the pirates moved you around, and obviously this was so that they wouldn't get caught. And you talk about how at one point they took you onto a Japanese tuna fishing boat.
It's a tuna vessel run by a Taiwanese company.
Oh, it's Taiwanese, right. Yeah. So you're on this Taiwanese vessel that was used for tuna fishing. And what I like is in the book you say you had the best food during your time because you're eating sashimi every day.
No, not every day. But it was a tuna vessel with something like 100 tons of tuna on board, frozen. And when they first took me on board, I was terrified. I thought, you know, my life is over. You know, this is it. And first of all, I met 28 new hostages, 28 new friends. Then the food was good, that's true. And the food was good because the kitchen was still operating. It was an operating fishing vessel with Chinese food that came out of the kitchen.
Right.
It was much better than the slop we were fed on land. And every 2 weeks or so, they would haul out a frozen tuna, carve it up with a power saw, cook the tuna, and whatever they didn't cook, they left a little red brick aside and actually sliced it up for sashimi.
Do you, in those moments, I know it's a crazy thing, but that's what I picked up in your book is, in those moments, did you find like a weird little bubble of joy in that moment when it's just you and your sushi on a pirate ship?
Happily, it was me and 30 other guys.
Right.
30 hostages enjoying sashimi. And that was something they did when they were at sea. You know, every now and then they treated themselves. They couldn't do that after the ship gave out. And those guys spent almost 5 years in captivity. I was only there for 2 years and 8 months.
Wow, you say only there for 2 years and 8 months. It really is a fascinating story. And you know, one part in the book that really blew my mind is when you get home. And like I say, if you're going to read the book, there's way too much for me to get through. It's a beautiful story. But you get back to Germany and you open your Facebook. And one of the pirates had sent you a message.
Yes, it took a couple of weeks, and we're not Facebook friends or anything like that. But I have been messaged through that app by a former guard. Yeah, Mohammed.
Your first instinct is to block.
Yeah.
But then you went, no, I'm going to catch up with Mohammed.
I caught up with Mohammed. We've had an ongoing sort of slow burning conversation, yeah.
And if he sent you a friend request, would you accept?
No.
I don't blame you.
That comes a little too close.
I really don't blame you. It's such a beautiful book. It's a fascinating story.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're out. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Glad you liked it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure having you here. The Desert and the Sea is available now. It's a beautiful story. Michael Scott Moore, everybody.